Cush Sovereignty, Black Righteousness by L. James Bolin. Chapter 4 Part 1, History Lesson. Big Ma heard Cush and walked toward the door unnoticed. As Cush finished, she started to cry. "Cush, that was so beautiful." Cush smiled. "Thanks, Big Ma." Samuel sat there with a tear falling from his eye and a deep lump in his throat. "What's the title?" "You should have led off with the title first." Cush said, "Dandaddy, you told me to write and write from the heart. I didn't know about no title. I guess God is like your grandfather?" After wiping the tear from his eye, Samuel said, "Well, you wrote it, you'll come up with a title later. I loved it, and you got the gift, son, you can only get better with time." Cush was excited and started blushing. "Thanks, Dandaddy." The room was quiet for a few seconds, then Cush said, "Dandaddy, I saw Gemini this morning, he seems to know what I'm saying." Samuel nodded his head. "He does." The approval from his grandfather, or maybe it was the coffee kicking in, but Cush became filled with so many questions. "Why you call him Gemini?" Samuel raised his eyebrows. "Well, son, he was born on my birthday, May 25th, which falls within the zodiac sign of Gemini. Now I'm not too keen on astrology. You can ask your grandmother about that. The way they explain it to me is that if you're looking down on the Torah, the words you see are the stars, and everything beneath the words is the universe, and we are living in a galaxy somewhere in that universe, and that's how Sabaoth see us as well. When you are born, the sun, moon, and stars aligned in such a way that it gives you your personality or something like that." Samuel waved his hands in the air. "Again, you're just going to have to ask your grandmother, she can explain it better than me. Let me finish listening to my recording, and we can finish where I left off yesterday. I'm an avid listener of wise men, new and old prophets, and just the truth, like that of Frederick, Daniel, and one of my favorites was Prophetess Akela Malik. You see, wisdom allows you to hear the same message and get something different out of it every time you listen to it." "Billy, unpause the recording I was listening to earlier," Billy replied. "Sure." After a few seconds, "This month of August, celebrating my Black, Indigenous, Native American roots and heritage. While my heart goes out to the victims of the catastrophic flooding in Kentucky, it must be remembered and is seldom mentioned that these were all lands that were occupied by and the birthright of Native Americans. We were here. We were first. These lands were taken from my ancestors by European colonizers. The state of Kentucky derives its name from an Iroquois word, Kenteten, which has several meanings. One of these is the River of Blood, which describes the present flooding situation. Rivers of water flow through the land. Half of your states in the USA have names that are indigenous in origins. The colonizers named some out of guilt deriving from the knowledge that these lands were taken from their original people, many of whom were driven off of it, and others because natives dominated the region and preserved their heritage in the names. It is the belief of indigenous people the world over that for every act of injustice and inequality, and there will be a reckoning. What is sent out will return in like measure as it was given, as Yeshua the Messiah made clear. With whatever measure you meet, it will be measured back again. Or what Imhotep the Egyptian said, what goes around, comes back." Samuel shook his head. "I thought it was some more left anyways. That was Prophetess Akela Malik, one of my favorites." Taking a deep breath, "Let's see, where did I stop yesterday?" Pausing for a moment. "Oh yeah, this is the part where our story begins in Lake Providence. Come to think of it, I haven't been to many places that haven't been alongside Highway 65. Now, I have been as far south as Waterproof, Louisiana, and as far north as Chicot, Arkansas, where me and your grandmother got married. East." He paused again, thinking. "Well, my grandfather lived in Indianola, Mississippi. I've been there quite a few times, especially when I was younger, so that's about it. As far as the west, I haven't gone any farther than Delhi, Louisiana. Oh, Louisiana, did you know we're the only place that uses parishes instead of counties? Even to this day. You must understand the history. But for now, we're going to just focus on this town to understand a man named Wanyenyekevu, a young warrior. You see, the alien technology affected many of the cities along the east and west coast, but Louisiana and Mississippi were some of the few places hardly touched by this new world of technology created by these Abenians. In Louisiana, places like New Orleans, Shreveport, and Baton Rouge turned into metros or ville de bulle, which means, in our native tongue, bubble cities. In Mississippi, we only have Jackson and Gulfport. I'll use the word Wakatilians from now on because some of these people are not of our tribe but are still considered Wakatilians. Cush shook his head. Okay. Samuel continued. The Wakatilians mostly lived in these types of rural areas. The Europeans settled Lake Providence and surrounding areas in the late 1830s. Once the federal government started enforcing the indigenous people, they called natives further west of the Mississippi River and took their land. They drained the cypress swamps along the Mississippi River and used slaves to clear the land for cultivation. By the mid-1800s, Louisiana was so ruthless and heartless back then that they jailed our people for no reason at all. Even our women were housed in the same cells as male prisoners, and some became pregnant willingly and unwillingly, of course. They passed laws declaring that all children born in the prison of our people serving life sentences would be the state's property. The women would raise the kids until the age of 10, then auctioned off, and the proceeds were used to fund schools for white children. Do you know who purchased these kids? Mostly prison officials, of course. Cush looked up and saw a tear fall from Samuel's eyes. Samuel pauses as he wipes the tear from his eyes, then takes a long sigh as he continues. Anyways, by the start of the American Civil War in 1861, the region mainly consisted of large cotton plantations along the river, which were worked by thousands of slave laborers. Lake Providence quickly developed after the Union Army came and built itself as a supply depot around 1862. The soldiers started digging a canal between the Mississippi River and Lake Providence. This was the same time slaves crowded into the camp at Lake Providence, thinking they were about to get their freedom. The population quickly went from a few hundred to several thousand. A military supply camp quickly turned into a city of slave refugees. They historically developed Lake Providence as cotton plantations before and after the Civil War. By the late 1800s, trade became famous because of the Mississippi River. Longboat men, who eventually were replaced by the steamboats, transported animal pelts, indigo, and cotton on the Mississippi River, making it a significant trading town. The carpetbaggers, or scalawags, as they were called, were greedy and heartless men who took advantage of the situation because there was a long line of abandoned plantations leased by the military. They wanted free labor, slaves. These scalawags were nothing more than ruthless overseers. They said the most negligent planter had shown more respect for their slave than these men. I'm going to say this and continue because I don't enjoy thinking about this, and you can read about that on your own. But slaves that were too old, sick, or too young were weeded out and sent to federal contraband villages and camps along the river. These villages included Wilmon, Transylvania, Omega, Ashley, and lastly, here in Tallulah. Highway 65 was born. Pausing for a minute, he continued. Oh, I will also say that they charged the slaves up to 5 times the actual value of things. Slaves were always told that the master owed them nothing by the end of the year, but they actually owed him money, and they would often boast about their deception. So, we were always in debt, and many felt they could never get out from under them. So, our people were mentally, physically, and financially slaves, and they held us back for centuries. Anywho, one of these plantations was Erie Plantation. This is where one of our descendant was as a slave, Willis Reynolds, Sr. We know very little of his birth or death. According to the June 2, 1880 census of Erie Plantation, Willis and his wife Kate were both born in 1854. His parents were from Virginia, and her parents were from Florida. At that time, he only had 4 kids. Sims was born in 1872, William, 1874, Samuel, 1875, and Rebecca was born in 1877. However, they had 5 more who came along later. Grant was born in 1878, Leona in 1887, and the rest, I can't find their birth dates, Albert, Belle, and Sue. They had names from their former slave owners. In their case, it was Reynolds. As a matter of fact, everyone had surnames or government names back then, and clans were not adopted again until the Abenians came on the scene. Education was ridiculous back then for our people. Most never saw the 6th grade. They didn't know how to spell Samuel, so they wrote Sam with an apostrophe L, some just call him Sam. Samuel or Sam L. Reynolds was a sharecropper but died a free man right here in Tallulah in 1985. Now Sam Reynolds married Cherry Relic on March 8, 1920, in Chicot, Arkansas. She was born in 1902 and died in 1998, even her last name is spelled more than one way. They had it written as Reddick and Relics, but they had 5 boys: Sam Jr., nicknamed Mike, born in 1923, Willis, nicknamed Bill, 1930, Clifton, nicknamed Sonny, 1936, James, nicknamed Piggy Boo, 1937, and John, nicknamed Buddy, 1940. They had 5 girls: Elizabeth, nicknamed Dutton, 1933, Essie Lee, nicknamed Tiny, 1935, John's twin sister Cora Lee, nicknamed Susie, 1940, Lee Gussie, nicknamed Nut, 1943, and the baby girl Mary Reynolds, nicknamed Lil Bit, was born in 1947. Now, Cherry's mother maiden name was Mariah Johnson, and her parents were Tom Johnson, born in 1850, and Viola Johnson, born in 1855 in Lake Providence, Louisiana. Tom and Violet had 2 other children named Susan, born in 1871, and Henry in 1876. Little is known of Cherry's father other than he died in Mississippi. His name might have been Ben, and lived in Bolivar County, Mississippi, I think. But her mother remarried Silas Diggs, Sr., and they had Willie Johnson, 1906, Isaiah Diggs, 1907, Hezekiah, 1908, Elizabeth or Lizzie, 1910, Silas Jr., 1912, and Wesley Diggs, 1913. These are your ancestors from your mother's side of the family. On your father's side, it's a little confusing, but there is more information because they were mostly Anakataz, but this is what I know. Samuel took a deep breath. Now, John Bolin was born in 1787 and married Miranda Chaddock. The children of Miranda and John Bolin were Arthur, 1792, James, 1806, Ezekiel, 1807, Cecilia, Rebecca, Sarah, Susanna, and William. James, who was born in 1806, was married to Frances Pitts, born in 1810, and their children were Tidvi or those Van Bolin, 1832. Marion, 1841, Sarah, 1843, William Harrison, 1845, John, 1846, Francis, 1846, and Laura, who was born in 1852. Samuel paused for a moment. I'm not even halfway through, but you can read it yourself. Cush smiled. Nah, Dan Daddy, I like it when you do it. I can't say some of those names yet. Samuel gave him a look. Well, okay. Most of the people I mentioned lived in Natchez, Roxy, and Amite, Mississippi, except when William came to Tallulah with his son. It might have been racially motivated because of TV's son William, or it might have been William's son Albert who married a Wakatilians and created a rift in the family. Still, I'm just guessing, but I know no one came to visit him but his brother James. Some called him Jim Bolin, who himself moved to Jackson, Mississippi, afterward. Anyways, William Bolin, born in 1869, married Lizzie Bolin. She was born in 1860, she died right up the street in Thomastown in 1949, but their children were Leona, 1892, John, 1894, James, 1895, Sam, 1896, our descendant Albert Bolin was born in 1899, and Leon Bolin, born in 1904. That's as far as I'm going, but I will say when T.V. Bolin was born in 1832 and his son William was born in Natchez, Mississippi, around 1868 and eventually moved to Roxy, Mississippi, around the time of the Devil's Punch Bowl. Cush looked at Samuel. Devil's Punch Bowl? What's a Devil's Punch Bowl? Well, the Irish were often used as overseers, especially in the South, and many said after the horrific event that was coined the Devil's Punch Bowl. Cush said. Ireland? Samuel said. Yes, but that's another history lesson. Let's just say he's a descendant of Chi on her father's side of the family for now. Anyway, let's see. Okay, Albert Bolin. Oh, boy. I'm trying to follow this thing. Hold all those questions for now. Samuel paused as he tried to remember where he left off. Now, I got it. Most of dem Bolins were brought here during the Americas during the Great Irish Invasion of 1840. I'm just going to start with William. You can ask Kakahoya about TV, and I'll call William, Will, from now on. Cush shook his head. Okay, I'll ask Mama Lean when I get a chance. Samuel continued. Will was a just man and was reminded of the mistreatment of his people and the many problems in Ireland, and, when they became overseers, some of them couldn't stomach the mistreatment of Wakatilians. It reminded them of what their people had escaped from, so they left. Moving from Natchez, Mississippi, they quickly made their way to Roxy, Mississippi.